Mr. Galbriath. So thank you very much for joining us. We're in Facebook land.
Yeah, wicked.
And yeah, look, I know we spoke before Christmas, and good old technology played its trick on me. So I'm so grateful to have your time again, and especially your expertise, because we're diving into this topic around identity and helping athletes transition, and specifically how to manage that loss of identity phenomena. So would you want to start with a bit of your background so people who don't know you, who may be on the other side of the world, can get an insight into who you are?
I was just thinking that recording we did pre-Christmas was probably the best I've ever been and ever done. So you watch tonight will be crap. People will be like, "Who is this guy? What's he on about?" And whereas you and I pre-Christmas we're like just buzzing. Yeah, like a philosophical discussion about life and retirement and life and death. And this tonight will probably be like, I won't know what to cover.
We'll make it hum.
Yeah. Background. Well, a registered clinical psychologist. So I'm not actually a sports psych. I was working in forensics for probably 8 to 10 years. All up with my training as well on that. So that wasn't practicing. It's a fair leg to get to a clin psych, so it was a bit of a hike, and so I was working at the last part of that already. And then there was a big chunk of time in forensics.
Forensics is with is this? Yeah, where is that?
So I was working with a community treatment centre for prison inmates coming out or who are paroled to us.
Yep.
And then later on working with child, youth and family with a small unit with the police, just, interviewing and supporting families with domestic violence.
Yeah. Wow.
And then when my children were born, so I've got a couple of daughters who are 15 and 12 now, it was a bit more difficult to be compassionate when I became a dad. So I needed something else to move into, and then I started into sport and started to work for free with a rugby club here in Hamilton or in the Waikato.
Yeah, you can name them.
Yeah, well, Hotapu in Cambridge. That was where I made my big break with Hotapu. Even though I was a shit rugby player when I played, it didn't seem to matter. And then I was just working with athletes wherever, any guinea pigs really that wanted to work for free with me for free. And then after about four years, I started making a little bit of coin. And then I got a break that meant I started at the 209 with the Chiefs, which was wicked. I had an opportunity to work with them in 209, and yeah, everything's sort of gone from there, really. Yeah, so most of my time now, or actually all my time is spent with sport, with the Olympians for high performance sport and in rugby.
Yeah, cool. Hey, well, go on. Rattle some of those Olympians, so people know we're just not making it up,
Have you got? So yeah, it's a funny one. Obviously, I've been with the Super Rugby for 10 years now.
Wow.
And with the men's sevens probably since 2010. So yeah, so it gives them a bit of an idea about where I roll. Yeah. I struggle to talk a little bit about the people I work with because it's often a part of a team of great people that surround these athletes. So
right. And so making that shift, Dave, was it similar cope-up or similar strategies, helping people who are in the prison?
Yeah, good question. Very similar, which is often for people a struggle to get their minds around how I'd work with an offender as well as an elite athlete in the same way. And I guess that's probably what, as a traditional psychologist, you come in at that work from a foundation of humanity rather than performance. And so much of elite sport is just dominated and polluted by performance and outcome. And then the mainstream psychology often deals in that space. And when you hear people talk about mainstream sports psychology, it's often just like it's a foreign world for me, because that's not how I think, because they work top down with the performance first to try and help the athlete perform.
Yeah,
and yet, ironically, I don't give a rat's ass about the performance. it's a crazy thing. For 10 years, I haven't really. I still enjoy, obviously, victory because I'm competitive and I like icing on a cake. But the guts of it is I actually don't care about it. I care more about the people and start from the bottom up and work with a human. And then
Nice.
if a human's in a good space and they've got good coaching, they're eating properly, sleeping properly, getting a reasonable training load in each week, we're going to see how good they are from that. We don't actually have to worry about the performance at all, which is the irony. The universe takes care of it.
Yeah, I believe
that's the fundamental foundation, which means then it doesn't matter whether I'm working with an individual, a team, someone who's unfortunately ended up in the criminal system. So it's all irrelevant where they're from or the context, because we're all people, and the underlying processes to being a decent human being are the same.
Awesome, which is a good segue, Dave, into this topic around identity. So, man, your experience with, all the people you've dealt with, where the hell does this thing come from? This thing, identity, and what shapes that for us?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? Like it's obviously a really complicated mixture that goes into creating someone at our age and child leading into adolescence and into adulthood. Probably the one constant variable around that though is culture. So the culture in which we were born into then structures and shapes our identity profoundly from birth. It creates the frameworks which we see the world and we see ourselves. But then when we get to school, that's usually reinforced because those parents grew up in the same framework. And then when we get to adolescence, it's reinforced again by social peer constructs or relationships because that's the same machine. And in the end, as an adult, we just end up often living unconsciously to a set of rules and a set of constructs that we believe the way the world operates and the universe holds. And then that obviously our identity just falls off that. So in many ways, our identity is formed by the machine in which we grow up. The machine in which we live, it's powerful, man. Like it's obviously, there's multiple levels that drive that, but at a very core heart, I reckon it's an economy. So the westernized economy or that industrial world shaped humanity very powerfully, and colonization's had a massive impact in that way too. And just the ramifications of that when we think about identity, that was all a white culture coming into an environment that has a massive impact on how people see themselves. And now we're 150 years on from that, and that's probably a good example of it. So the culture in which we're born into is the context which shapes our identity. So high performance sport exists in that place too.
Okay, so I'm an expert for some repeat here, but what I heard was, we grow up in this environment. Whatever's in that environment affects how we might behave and act, and then that's reinforced later on as we grow up through the stages of life.
Yeah, probably the key thing in that space is what's reinforced is what's considered important by that group of people or that culture.
Right.
So if we think hard work is important, then we become someone who's identified as a hard worker. If we think impressing other people or pleasing other people is important in that culture, we become people pleasers or worried about what people think about us. If money is seen as important, then later on we become driven by money. So you see how what the culture defines as important when we're young, then is reinforced when we get to school. So at school, it starts to reinforce is that you perform well, you get ticks, not crosses on your paper, that you're in the in-group, that teachers like you, you get good reports, that you're considered a smart kid, a fast kid, a talented kid, and not a loser. So it all gets structured from that point, and no one wants to be a loser. So you start to orient that way as well. So it's what's considered important by the dominant group that drives our identity, good or bad.
Yeah. So could you provide a quick contrast with those you worked with in coming out of prison? So they were shaped by their environment, so they were forced to do certain actions because that culture group valued those actions.
Yeah, the criminal ones is actually, like it's a great, we can look at it both sides. But the criminals, the society, in the end, for whatever reason, when they hit the main machine at school and then intermediate school and high school, they're seen as an outsider or a misfit. And then they misbehave and they start to be seen as bad. So essentially they become good at being bad. So they then live out the identity of being a bad bastard. So they go, if you think I'm a bad bastard, I'll show you how bad I am. And then they live into that identity. So we create the very thing that causes us that much problem. So it's a crazy world out there when you think about it. Just sometimes you think about it too deeply and it drives you insane, I reckon, when you start to think about the twists and the conspiracies that exist about what we're trying to create. We don't want people to be free thinkers and well behaved. We want criminals. We want people in desperate situations. And then it leaves all these, leaves just people in power. And it's crazy when you start to think about it that way, about how much control was on us. But anyway, I didn't come to talk about my paranoia.
I'm starting to get some now that I'm a parent, though.
So I guess you can see how with that one, they end up living the identity that's prescribed upon them by society.
Yeah.
Same with us. So an athlete's the other way. Yeah, it's the same thing the other way. So where athlete starts to have their identity prescribed by the people around them at school, they're good at rugby, they're good at sport, they're good at maths, they're good at English, then that becomes their identity. Plus, it's also a layer underneath that is I have to maintain that level of goodness, otherwise I'm no longer accepted and I'll be rejected and judged.
And I never forget the first day at high school. We came from a Portuguese small town into Auckland. First day, I feel like no one.
Yeah.
And then that time we had our first game of touch or rugby. I think it was tackle, and then you became someone. And then I remember telling myself I have to go to that lunchtime game every lunchtime just to keep up that identity,
Yeah.
So that identity starts to build and build and build.
Correct.
I can see how then, well, I know when I experienced, but you would have seen it way more than when this athlete has to stop playing, that it all falls apart if it's only relied on that source of acknowledgement, that source of recognition,
Well, the other tragedy is when you spend your life being good at one thing and that becomes the way that you find yourself every day and every week and performance, when you stop and you no longer can do that, what have you got? You actually have a vacuum, plus you're actually crap at other things. So you were good at one thing, which most people then assume that is also then you'll be good at many things. But that doesn't hold. It just doesn't hold. You think I'm just learning the guitar at the moment to try and stay connected to my 15-year-old. And man, when I walk into my lessons, my daughter goes first, and sometimes I record her on my phone because I can't tell the difference between her and the instructor. And then I walk in and you see his face, he just goes, oh, shit. It's his whole body language just goes like, whoa. And he goes, just keep it simple today, David. And I'm thinking, bro, man, I'm trying so hard. But that's the thing, I have to work hard to go. I don't care what he thinks. I want to learn the guitar, and I'm crap, but I'm loving learning. So I even have to work hard in that moment because I'm worried about what he's thinking about me. Because I'm worried that he's thinking I'm not doing my homework. Oh, I'm doing my homework hard out. Still crap. So that's a real good example of it. Yeah.
And if you didn't have that, I suppose that mindset of I love learning, and I know this happened to me when I stepped out of being an athlete and I had my first challenge in a different industry, I backed back. I wanted to retreat back into my little cave and go, whoa, this being a novice again. I know you mentioned this in our last conversation, going from an expert to novice. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh, I think they're completely different universes. When you're someone, as an expert, you don't even have to think about what you're doing. You're just unconsciously good. Whereas as a novice person, you go back to a place where you have to be consciously thoughtful about learning something completely new. So you're slow, you're uncoordinated. All of those things that we associate to the opposite of what we were and whatever the sport was is what we then become. So we become a Gumby. And so it's like you can see how the challenge in that space is you've gone from feeling like you're a reasonable person based on your identity as being an elite athlete to being someone that isn't. And then if you have a construct which is that or a framework in your mind that for you to be somebody you had to be good at something. So to go to bed happy you had to perform well. That's what it usually happens as an athlete, is you set up frameworks in your head about what success equals, and success equals I have to be perfect and I can't be imperfect. Otherwise I'm shit, and it's black and white. I can't be in the middle. So you have this black and white thing where I only go to bed feeling happy if the coach is happy. I've made all my tackles. I've scored a couple of tries. I set the game alight. Everyone's shouting my name on the sideline. The paper wants to talk. The media wants to interview me. And I get an All Black invitation. They don't go to bed feeling real good. But if none of those things happen, I play crap, I miss a couple of tackles, the coach is unhappy, he draws me off after 15 minutes or straight away after the second half starts. I go to bed feeling depressed.
Yep.
So if we have that framework, and we don't know how that works, but that's how most athletes have it set up. Success equals I have to be perfect, otherwise I'm shit. When they go away from that sport into another area where they're a novice, they're failing more than they're succeeding. They are actually opposite. They're actually, they're going to be unhappy all the time because they're not meeting their own expectations, even though that was set up for another area of competence.
Yeah. So are you saying then we have to reframe, reset up this framework that we measure ourselves by then?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it would be great if we could set that up for them when they're an athlete. Because if we could set up, even if we often when we talk about it, people say, "Oh, it sounds nice in theory, but it's very difficult to apply to the actual heat of battle."
Yes.
But if we set up a framework whereas success equals failing, like as crazy as that sounds, if you look at the best athletes in the world, they have a framework where they don't have success equals perfection; they have success equals imperfection, because they know in that space they're chasing growth, they're chasing extension, they're chasing a space in front of them where they are, and they want to find out what they've got. But most people end up conservative because they have fear that they're going to fail, so they become careful and conservative. But if we can reframe that in sport, then actually they can start living in a way where, if there's that stuff we talked about before, before Christmas, where if we can start to talk about success as being defined by the way that, I guess, just quite simply, if we look at even just define in a way as it's more about my integrity and how I apply myself to my job rather than the outcome of my job. Now we can start to create a framework which is actually directly related to who we are as a person. So if we're saying, let's say we say our identity is constructed by a deep belief that I give everything my heart and soul.
Yeah.
So then if we can build from that and go, actually, who am I? Well, I'm a man that gives everything I can. So what does that look like as a goal in rugby? Well, it looks like I'm going to operate at high meter Mets off the GPS system, and I'm going to work my ass off to stay in that band the whole first half.
Yeah, nice.
And then say to the coach before I start, coach, just be careful, just watch me today because you might be needing to suck me off at 35 minutes because I'm going to be done. Because that's how I go. I'll give you my heart and soul. I'm going to, I may make some mistakes in that, but guarantee I'll be there for you. And then as you get fitter, you'll be able to last 65 and 75 and 85. So you see how it becomes the focus is what is important tonight is that I die on the park, and that equals whatever the meter Mets are. Now we're creating a construct which has nothing to do with the outcome. I'll let that take care of itself, but all I have to do is go out there and empty the tank. You see how people go, it's pretty hard to apply that in the moment. It is if you're obsessed by outcome. You see how it sucks you away from that because you might make an error in your judgment.
And here's a scenario for you, Dave. Then, and I know a few others went through, but I had a mate who jumped out of his sport career, started a role in an organisation, and he started to make mistakes, and he was, willing to accept that he'd make mistakes, like learning to drive again. But what he struggled with was the other people's opinions of him. And it was like a knife in the heart each time I'd say, come on, mate, you're this, he used to be this former hotshot athlete. You can't even get this job done. Or he's letting other people down in his team because he's missing deadlines or not getting it done as fast. So he sounded like, and I went through this too, I was able to give it my all and I understood it was a part of a process, but man, it was hard when I was letting others down and other people were kind of banging on you. So it's that thing,
Well, I guess there's multiple layers to it, isn't it? Like there's multiple layers to a strong identity. And again, it's unfortunate we don't do enough of this in elite sport to help them set up the clarity about who they are as a person, because the other part is vulnerability. Yeah. So a lot of people mistaken vulnerability for weakness. Ironically, vulnerability and all of the resilience research is courage, it's strength. So if you think about the word vulnerable, when people use the word vulnerable, they actually meaning people being courageous, like sharing with each other. It's a courageous act. Asking for help, it's a courageous act. When they talk about people being courage, I told them what I thought. That's vulnerability. That's setting yourself up to be out in a group where you're actually sharing your thoughts. That's incredibly vulnerable. So vulnerability and courage are the same thing. So you can see, again, if we think about identity and setting ourselves up for transition, it's about setting the framework up before we go into transition about in our head about how we're going to set that up.
Yeah.
Because if we have an identity where we see vulnerability as being a strength, before we start our job, we'll go and sit down with our manager and say, I just need to have a chat with you about how this is going to look. Because
Yeah.
you're going to be expecting me to be brilliant, but I'm going to let you know I'm going to be shit for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can see how straight away we're setting up a different framework. You can't do that if your ego is connected to having to be like Superman.
Yeah.
Because
And
Superman don't cry. Superman don't go and ask people for help. Superman, he's like, he's the bomb. So he can't ever tell people he can't. So he says,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll do that, yeah, I'll do that, yeah, I'll do that. He can't because he just isn't skilled in that space. And so that key thing again around the identity, if we think about the constructs or put an identity together, it's asking who you are as a person. But you see how in elite sport we don't help people do that either. Because if you have an elite sport, I'm a courageous athlete, I pursue the edge. See if they say that as their identity, straight away they're going to have success equals failing. But straight away they're going to have something on there which is I seek help. Something else they'll have set up there is I train failure. I actually go and train and I get distraction. I have people try and put me off. So the whole world they operate in is different. So when they come to transition, this bit's finished, this bit starts, the first thing they'll do is they'll sit down and have a cup of tea with the person that they're now employed with and go, well, before we start, bro, we just need to have a little chat about this. Let's get the let's get the structure set up so that you'll get the best of me. I want to be here for a long time because part of my identity is loyalty. So if you stand by me, I'll be here forever. So you can see how the identity allows us to have that chat. Who am I? I'm loyal. I'm family. So you need to talk to them about finishing at 3 o'clock, go and pick up your kids or whatever it might be. I'm courageous, which means I need to have talk about vulnerability. I want to see you each week to give you some feedback about how I'm going so you know where I'm at. So you see automatically we start to set things up off who we say we are. We haven't even got to work yet. And then you bring in a cake and muffins and meet the whole team and then they'll ask you, so what are you thinking about your first day? And you say, man, I'm shitting my pants. There's vulnerability. And people go, why are you shitting your pants? You're like just hard out Olympian. You go, bro, that was yesterday. Today, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm a complete Gumby. So you see how straight away setting that up creates a whole different context into what we go into. The best thing about it, though, if we have that ego, if we have our ego in check like that and our identity is that solid, the place we're going to is a place we want to be going to. So it won't be like it won't be seen as a security fallback or a plan B and C. It'll be this is our next best dream after our sport's finished. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. We're here because it's part of my vision. That could be bloody planting trees, picking up rubbish.
Yeah.
It could be helping kids in orphanages. If that's what your next step is and you have clarity about that, you're going to be going with all of your energy in that place saying, I'm so pleased to be here.
Yeah, so there's
be like opposite.
There's a few things probably in the conversation. The one that I pick up is knowing who we are as athletes. So I heard you say acknowledge again the process. So I'm loyal, I'm committed, I'm a deviant trier. You're saying identifying that stuff is building that identity that then can be transferred into the next phase because it's not based on outcome.
Yeah, you find that you do this when you do your track and you head on your track around the country. You just get into the habit of asking people over coffee. So who are you? Ask them, who are you? And they'll be like, what do you mean, who am I? What a stupid question, right? So people struggle with it. If people can go, well, that's something I've given a lot of thought to, straight away that's someone that you go, oh, okay, here we go. What's coming? So even in my work today with athletes that are right in the middle of their careers, I'm asking the same question. Who are you? Bring some words back to me which let me know who you are. So if you say you're a charitable fella, right? So a lot of people say, oh, I'm a charitable fella. And I go, that's sweet. How much of your money do you make and give away? How many hours in the last week did you give away to kids at schools or for free on your own decision with no one making it happen and that no one knows about? Because anonymous charity is the most powerful form of charity. So then I'm asking them to prove it to me in rituals, which means those words they use have validity or integrity. Otherwise, they're all shit. So then they say, "Oh, I'm a family man or a dad," and I go, "Okay, well, tell me how many minutes you spend with your son." "Oh, no, I'm too tired." I go, "You're all shit." So you can see how it's people say. First of all, it's who are they? Then they can get those concepts or those words or those phrases clear. Like I'm family, I'm about charity, I'm a courageous man, I like adventure or adventurous woman or whatever it is. And if they have that clarity, we've got somewhere to start with. So now we've got somewhere to go. Because then I can say, okay, so what are the rituals that fall off that? What would I see if I was tracking you for a week?
Yeah, prove it.
They say, oh, they say, yeah, I'm a very disciplined, patient person. I go, what's your ritual for discipline and patience? What is it you do off there? So they actually have to then generate these actions. But the extension of the rituals, because that's the identity as the person, the extension of the rituals is, what are your projects? So your rituals might be, you might wake up in the morning and do a half an hour meditation, half an hour stretching, and plan your day. That's a pretty good way to start. If you do that, you're already like in 1% of the universe, man. That's crazy for a way to start your day. So there's some good rituals around authenticity and being authentic and genuine. So that's the way you function day by day, week by week, year by year. That's just like your genetic structure, but your social or psychological structure. The extension of it all is what your projects are going to be.
Right.
So if you say a charity, well, what's your project around charity? Those sorts of things. If you say you're adventurous fella and a father, what are your projects with your sons and daughters this year? What are you going to build? What are you going to do first that you've never done before?
And that's what hit home to me when I was in the thick of rugby.
Yeah.
I always pride myself as a family man and as a good dad and father. But the day I head off from rugby, I'd rest.
Yeah.
Not spend with the kids.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
in my mind, I'm telling myself, I've worked hard. I'm providing for the whānau. I get to have my feet up now and then. Yeah, that's what makes me a family man.
Yeah, that's right. That's what reinforced the selfish man. Exactly. Like we build all these reasons in our head for us to do things that we think is a rational and acceptable thing to be doing given the context.
Yeah.
But there's a real challenge in that space. Like I'm constantly trying to help people see the importance of purity, maturity, and being really secure in their identity or who their self-esteem and maybe secure. How do you describe it? So like a secure self, mature and secure versus an insecure and immature. Like an immature athlete, when someone gets injured, they go, "Yeah, good job. That means I've got an advantage." Or if someone else loses, you go, "Yeah, well, that's good. That's them out of the way." That's the immaturity person. Whereas I'm challenging even the athletes in their prime right now to go, bro, what does a mature man look like when you get smashed? Surely you'll pat them on the back and go, man, wicked clean out. Or go and celebrate their try if they turn you inside out. It's a good rugby moment of magic. Go across and celebrate with them and then run down and stand under the uprights and take your shame. But they look at me like, bro, you're weird. And I go, but isn't life supposed to be about living fully and not about begrudging people stuff? But if someone else wins lotto, man, that's wicked. And if we win, that's wicked too. But the essence of it is we have to constantly challenge ourselves every day about are we a mature, a secure person, or are we immature? And often that's a pretty wicked discussion to have with ourselves, because it doesn't mean to say that it's not okay to feel down. So a lot of people, depression and anxiety is real common. I don't want people who are listening to this over time to think that they shouldn't be feeling depressed and anxious or whatever it might be. So I'll be sitting with someone who has anxiety or depression, or they've had grief and they've lost somebody, and I'll let them be in their grief. So I'll let them be depressed. I'll let them be anxious, which they might be sad, no energy, no motivation, having a panic attack right there with me. So I'll be just saying, sweet, it'll pass. Just sit with it. And then I'll just say, now let me know when you're through that. And then when they're depressed, they'll just talk about it. They'll cry, and then I'll just sit there with them. But then I'll go, have you finished? And they'll go, yeah, I have. Or like their tears will stop. Yeah. And I'll go, sweet, man, that's great. Now what?
Yeah, right.
And then usually the depression and anxiety, now this is a crazy finding over 10 years. Depression and anxiety is an identity thing, but more specifically, it's a courage to coward dimension thing. So people who have depression feel like they're failing more than they're succeeding. So they end up doing less, and they end up running away from the very thing they're failing at because it's become painful. So now we've got a process which becomes the neurochemicals in the brain start to be less because they're not active as they used to be, so they're not firing in the same way. Then we get a process of them ending up feeling worse and worse each day. But it starts with because they are running away from the thing that's causing them a feeling of failing. Yeah. And then the second part with anxiety is always about running away from what we fear. Hence, panic becomes an extension of anxiety, and then panic attacks grow in their ferocity because we end up running more and more away from it. Then we become afraid of the fear, no longer the thing that we were afraid of, but it's fear of fear. So both of
Yeah,
those
right.
cases, you can actually start to understand them on the courage-coward continuum. When
Well,
people live, eh?
yeah, show us that.
Yeah, so if you go courage and coward, when people live cowardly, it ends up creating a really bad self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm,
So they're afraid, so they run away from what they're afraid of, so they do less practice or less preparation for the meetings or whatever it might be. So when they get there, they're underprepared. So they perform worse. They feel more like a failure, so they do less again. So the coward becomes just like a terrible prison. But
yeah.
the courage end automatically leads to us having a completely different experience. We approach the thing that we're afraid of, and as soon as we approach what we're afraid of, it's no longer a fear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no longer even defined as a fear. It's defined opportunity. It's changed its face just because of the change of our behaviour towards it.
And so when we step out, there's some fear there
Correct.
and pain.
Correct.
Because there's feedback from others. There's
Correct.
this lower in status from expert to novice. And
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is we need to persist with that, but reframe where
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
heading.
Correct.
I'm
Yeah.
saying when you're in this space, that's an amazing opportunity to grow.
It's the crazy thing is if we really follow this through and start to identify ourselves as a certain person that lives a certain way, the outcome, or what I refer to as the icing, becomes so irrelevant because we're taking so much nutrients from the cake itself and the pride in baking the cake. And you think about it, the universe it's crazy. If we actually apply ourselves to what we love wholeheartedly, and the most
Yeah.
successful people in the world seem to be like this, they actually don't really care about the outcome. They get more of a buzz about creating the projects or creating this idea that solves people's problems, and then they make shitloads of money from it. But they never set about it for the money.
Yeah.
People who set about doing things for the money, ironically, end up being careful, conservative, afraid of losing money, so they start to save rather than invest, and they just
Yeah.
get wound up about finances. They have budgets, they get worried about finances. It just does them in because that's what they're always about. Versus about finding what they love, finding a project which falls off that, and then investing their time in it for the love of it.
Yeah. And so here's the next question. A lot of athletes will face, I really love doing that, but it's not going to give me the financial security at this point right now than what I'm used to.
Yeah.
So are we saying just do the old take the leap, take the jump and worry about the financial bit later?
Yeah. That's crazy, because we generate so many reasons why we can't jump, man. And
Yeah.
one of the most regular and frequent is I don't have financial security, so I can't jump.
Yeah.
And then I go, well, get ready for 50 years of no financial security, brother, because you are not going to jump ever.
Yeah.
I just love that. It's crazy as it sounds, but until there's a guy, Alex Honnold, he's the world's #1 free rock climber. So most people have a Mac computer. The big rock of granite that's on that front is Yosemite National Park.
Yeah.
So when they look at that rock, it takes most people 2.5 days to climb that with ropes. He holds the world record for climbing that with no ropes, and it took him 2.5 hours. So they can go on YouTube and type him in, and they'll find all of his stuff. And they asked him, "What do you do? What do you do to prepare to climb a rock face?" And he goes, "Well, it takes me about 1.5 years to prepare." Which is, first of all, I was like, "Whoa, man, that's a long time." And he said, "I climb it with ropes first, and then I climb it with ropes and without ropes, and I climb it with ropes in the most difficult part, so I can really take some time to study the cracks and footholds and handholds." And then he goes, "I'll just let it sit and just let it mature for an amount of time, so my mind just plays with it." And he goes, "I don't actively visualize it, but when my downtime is, my mind starts to play with the way I'm going to climb those different faces." And they said, "Oh, what do you visualize?" And he goes, "Oh, I visualize falling to my death." How crazy is that? No one expected that. I listened to a podcast of him a couple of days ago, and he goes, they asked him, Michael Gervais asked him, "What do you think about and you visualize?" And he goes, "Oh, I visualize seeing my body smashed to pieces on the bottom of the rocks, falling off the cliff at 700 feet. And Michael Gervais was like, he was just like gobsmacked. He was like, "What?" But when I look at it, you see what he goes, "I also think about being great. I also visualize myself climbing the mountain. But you see, for me, what I saw him do is he's gone, well, the one possibility is I could die.
Mm.
One possibility is I could fail really big and it could cost me my life. Another possibility is I could climb that mountain and be the first man to ever do it, and it would make me great. So you see how he's imagined in both scenarios, but by doing that, he's accepting both scenarios. Whereas most people will visualize failing and they won't accept it. It'll just cause so much distress, it'll control them, and they'll run away from it and they won't accept it. They'll go, I need to stop that from happening. He goes, I'm going to die one day anyway. And he goes, so I'm actually going to choose to climb rocks because I love it.
Yeah, wow.
And then you can see how he goes, okay, so I could die and I could succeed. But it's the same for athletes when they're in transition. I could fail. In fact, I could die of starvation because I'm not going to make any money. But it just ain't going to happen. And then the other end is, well, I could be really successful. But do you see how both are irrelevant? I don't give a rat's ass about either of those. Show me what you're going to do this afternoon through your actions. So we accept both of those, and then and that's what happened. He'd accept both of those, then walk up to the rock and go, oh, I'll put my hand there, and away he goes.
And as long as what you're doing on a daily basis, you're enjoying it,
correct.
It's feeding, it's providing that fulfillment and peace. It's all that matters.
That's all that matters. The research is really clear. If you earn more than 70K, but that's a lot of money anyway, it doesn't matter whether you earn 70K or 700,000 or 700 million K, you don't get any happier.
Wow.
Crazy, eh? And everyone goes, oh, I'd love to own, I'd have $10 million. But they don't understand. They think, oh, that means they'll be happy. They're going to be just as happy poor. They'll probably be happier poor.
And so what leads in my head, what's saying then, again, our identity is fed by the society and potentially by this remuneration and this bidding of contracts, or, it's about financial reward. And so that becomes part of who we are. And so when we move to our next step.
And it means that, so that financial reward then be connected to what sort of car I can drive, what sort of house I live, what street I live in. And all of that has to have equaled what level I was as an athlete. Yes. That becomes the unconscious driver. So it's unacceptable for a world ranked #1 athlete to drive around in a Toyota Truno. Don't fit. So that's the big issue. That's where they'll feel really depressed, because all of a sudden their complete identity is just being, well, I guess for them it's like the worst case scenario.
Yeah, so just a bit of clarity here, Dave. I know some will be thinking this. So I've come out of sport, and at the moment this is my identity. I might be thinking, I've got to have financial security, I've got to have the bells and whistles, and I was #1, so I can't go back and, live here or drive this type of car. So when I step out of my sport, that identity is driving me to do these things, to get financial, to get in, a lovely house and cars and homes. But ultimately that might not make me. And so how do we then bridge that gap? How do we get to happiness if we are lost and we don't know what that is for us?
Well, the first point, I reckon the first thing to start with is we live in an era where people are pursuing happiness. And I'm convinced now, if you're going to get rid of any word in your dictionary, it would be 2 or 3. One would be failing. I'll get rid of that. Right. And I'll get rid of happiness. And I'd replace happiness with fulfillment. Because if people pursue happiness, that sets you up. It sets up a really interesting conflict, because if I'm happy, I can't be grief-stricken. If I'm happy, I can't. If I'm happy, I can't be down. If I'm happy, I can't be vulnerable. If I'm happy, I can't be anything else. I just have to be happy. So it automatically robs us of proper human experience. So I reckon it's just another creation of the Western world, which has people all over the world spending millions of dollars trying to find happiness, when the actual secret to inner peace is realizing that happiness is one of many feelings that we want to be pursuing. I want to feel sad because it helps me feel what happy is. I want to feel failing because it helps me feel what success is. So I want to have contrast. So I want those feelings. So if I'm feeling sad, I go, whoa, I'm feeling sad. Girls ask me, Dad, are you angry? I go, yeah, I'm really angry. And then I can go later, when I say I love them, they go, oh, this guy's genuine because I can see the whole spectrum. Whereas people go, no, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. No, I'm not unhappy. I'm not sad, because their expectation is I have to be happy all the time. Fulfillment's a way different concept to be pursuing, which is really, I've given my heart and soul to what I could do, and I'm pursuing what I love. Let's give it a good nudge and see what happens. And then from that, some days will be bad, some days will be terrible, some days will be full of failure, some days will be good. You can guarantee at the end of a week and the end of a year, you'll feel pretty fulfilled because you know that you've honored who you are, and you've committed to following through on the projects that you said you were going to try it. Honda Motor Company, now this is a wicked one for people listening. The Honda Motor Company, and this is where this fits into what I guess everything we've been saying, is when they're employing an engineer to build motors for them, they have to sign a contract that says if you are perfect, we'll fire you. Wicked, eh? Yeah. So they want engineers to blow up motors because that's where they know they'll learn something.
Yeah.
So they want the motors to always work. They want a motor just to explode on the test track.
Wicked. How much stress that takes off their shoulders, are you?
Yeah. So imagine if we can set that up in ourselves, which is actually all I'm demanding is I don't want you to be perfect. If you're perfect, you're going to hand in your notice. We should be setting up in our head, an expectation, I want to fail again and again and again. But you do that with a discussion with the people you're working with, because from that you should find massive learnings, and then things will grow forward because you're going to succeed as well. So it sets up a whole different revolution in our head, is that I expect that I don't get it right because that means I'm pushing. That means I'm growing. So it's almost like what we're saying there is just, give your heart and soul, set up a framework which allows you to be with people around you who understands that and share the same framework, and then go at it.
That sounds exciting, Dave. I can see a workshop. I can see a workshop. Those coming up, or just before they come up, you come in and you develop this framework, and you get, it's like some brainwashing. It's a brainwashing weekend.
The key thing off it is, for people that are listening, it's not something that they'll not, if they can understand that it's something on the courage to coward spectrum, is they've got to go to courage again and again and again and again. It's not like they can do courage tomorrow and it's sorted. So courage is what quietens the fear part of the brain down.
Right.
So there's a part of our brain that fires off when we're confronted with a moment where we might fail, which generates fear, which then in past would have led us to avoid or run away from that moment.
Yep.
If we can in that moment accept the worst case scenario but still go ahead and do it, that quietens that part of the brain down. So the courage allows us to do it. It quietens the brain. Then we go home. We go back again tomorrow, do the same thing. Quietens the brain down. You do that for a year, and the part of your brain that's fired from fear for generations will now be quiet, which will allow you to step into that space where there's risk of failure, and it will no longer feel like risk of failure. It'll feel exciting, like, here we go. This is where it's going to happen. We'll find out some stuff today. Let's do this. Let's record it. Let's get feedback. Let's get as much stuff happening as we can. So you see how it's a completely different framework. So if they can just realize that the courage is little by little leads to an incremental shift in the way their brain fires, which quietens down the very part of the brain which in the past, and for most people because they don't understand it, leads them to run away.
And it's similar to like approaching your as in rugby tackling.
Correct.
Your first couple might have hurt, but if you back off there, but if you keep going, you practice, get better, and then it's not that scary point again.
There's so many examples. Like Toastmasters is another classic. There's one that everyone knows. Toastmasters is based on the same principles. We're going to help you be more and more progressively courageous, and so you'll more and more progressively relax in spaces where before you were shit scared. Life's exactly the same. We should be setting daily and weekly courage challenges and asking ourselves, what's the most courageous thing I can do today? So people who have depression and anxiety should be asking that question each morning. What's the most courageous thing that we can do? When I was 29, I had massive panic attacks. I was petrified of getting the bash. So I thought,
Yeah.
what's the most courageous thing I can do? So I went and learnt martial arts. I started to drive on the motorway from Mercer to Auckland in the fast lane of my Holden HQ station wagon at 35 miles an hour in the fast lane. Used to piss people off.
I heard this story.
Yeah, used to piss people off, and I didn't get a bash. And all of a sudden, the fear of getting the bash and upsetting people just like went boof. There's an example about it. But the thing is, I had debilitating panic attacks. And I realized that if I was going to overcome them, I had to have massive radical courage. I just couldn't have little courage because the anxiety and fear was so big, it needs to be relative in the courage that we then use. Otherwise, the fear will swamp the courage.
Yeah.
So it's got to be relative and a bit bigger.
So an athlete about to walk, or they might have already transitioned right now, and they might be in a workspace that is fearful every day.
Yeah.
They're feeling this lower in status and they don't want to go. They've just got to confront that, like you said, set up that framework with their manager and be courageous.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's key to set the framework up. Otherwise, you're jumping out of an airplane when you're petrified of heights, and it'll be potentially traumatic. So you've got to set up the framework first to allow a gradual implementation of what the identity is that we want to be living.
Yeah.
But some workplaces have assholes too, so they've got to be a little bit mindful that there could be an environment where there's some assholes who like to see people in a less way or put them down. So that's a little bit just to be careful of in that. In those places, you need the radical courage is still useful, but it's the radical courage is to do it slowly and set up a framework with your manager or your line manager or your boss, which allows the things that we've talked about to be implemented. Yeah, and then they have a framework to really, flourish in. So they don't have to go into the office tomorrow morning and drop some big bombs. But they might have to go in and have a chat with their employer or manager and go, I really like to talk about my professional development. Can we set up a bit of a plan for that? Let's talk about what that might look like. And then that might be in that space, they'll be a little bit more vulnerable and ask for help and set some projects up which have different timelines because they're starting, they need to take some time to get it. Those sorts of things, But the key thing is I might actually realise I don't want to do that job.
And that's the definite point, eh? Why progress down something that they don't enjoy and not finding fulfilling? Like you said, they're gonna end up in 50 years of that if they don't sort it out and get into that space. And
and often anxiety with people and procrastination is related to fear of death. This is how I see it. So as they get older, they get more anxious because time's starting to run out. They might not think they're afraid of death, but you can guarantee they'll be starting to think, shit, I'm 40, shit, I'm 35, time's running out. So as soon as they have that little reflection, they are now thinking about death, even though they don't think they're thinking about death. They are whenever their time's running out. So the classic thing is, that's where the mature and secure fits in, which is they have to come to a point of acceptance, which is they can't do another 50 things at the level they did that one thing. They've got to have to either accept that they probably can do 5 or 6 things, but it's still only going to be average.
Yeah.
If they be really good at something again like they were, they can only have time, but only got time to do probably 1, max 2 things between 35 and death to get that good. So they have to make that they have to have that sort of realization because it might be for they've got to decide to cut off from some things.
And that's a good little point, Dave. One question here from one of the former players, and I'm just going to turn my light on. I realise I'm in the dark. Is can they be at the same level, identity-wise, as when they were a player? Can you just put it all there, and I'll just turn this light on?
Oh, there. The key is there that what you can always be the same person. So if you hold identity as the goal, then that's the challenge. Is we think about what they've set up in their sporting career. What you and I are talking about tonight is to reverse that to a point where it's about the cake, not the icing, and then it's about depth. So I'm 46 now. By the time I'm 66, man, I want to be a monk. I want to be so deep in the way that I experience the sunset. I want to sit here and go, look at that, and then feel it like that. And then when my grandchildren or moko come around, I want to go, well, let's have a long cup of tea, and talk about the day or something, but enjoy the day, enjoy that little bit. It's like my last breath. So if I, you think about what you just said then, if they can get clear that what we're trying to set up as a frame of reference is to go deep in who we are as a person. So let's say they take up knitting. They want to become a
Yeah.
professional knitter and knit scarves and socks for the marketplace, right? If they
Yeah.
apply themselves an hour a day to that knitting, in 5 years, they'll be a national expert.
Uh-huh.
So they can get as good as they were if they choose to do one thing with a huge amount of focus and attention. They can get that good again. But the key
Mm.
is they almost need to give up trying to get that good at it to get that good
Yeah.
at it. And then to
Yeah.
realize that actually what the goal is to become deeper as you are because most people by the time they retire, they're starting to getting close to be parents.
Yeah.
And then that's their real shift is they can move to a point where they then commit to I want to be the most radical, authentic father or mother
Yeah.
that in my community. I want people to think that I'm the strangest parent in town. And do things like Christmas, school sports, swing sports,
Mm.
coaching teams, all these things that we can do as a parent in our community and make that our profession and be the most
Yeah.
radically different parent we can, be the most romantic, radically different partner or a husband or wife that we can, and make that the goal. And then off that, you watch what happens to your finances. Because
Wow.
you'll pursue that and you'll have a couple of projects that you'll be ticking over in that time that you have available. And then just something funny seems to happen in the universe. If people can release from the pressure of money,
Mm.
money comes. That's a crazy, crazy phenomenon. If you can release away from it, it'll take care of itself. If you can be that authentic in your marriage and your relationship, and if you've been a parent and you're parenting and your community, helping out people who need help in your community, if you can be that pure in that space, you won't be depressed. You won't
Mm.
have anxiety. And then, funnily enough, your bank account will start to take care of itself. That's crazy.
I've gone quiet because you've pointed out where I've been going wrong.
It doesn't mean to say you don't have financial goals, but
Mm.
I challenge people those financial goals might be I'm going to find someone in the country who's the best at what I want to be involved in and go and ask them to be a mentor. That would be the goal, not to make 5 million. Go and surround yourself by the people who know what they're doing so you learn and the numbers will take care of themselves. Almost pay someone to take care of your bank account so you never look at your money.
I'm going to let you know how I go with that.
Yeah, that'd
Hey,
be wicked.
we're coming up to the hour, and I don't want to. Seriously, we could talk for a few more hours. There's so much there, and some questions are coming in. I'm not sure if you might have time, but old Callum Bruce is asking for the Fabio and Tom Banks story.
No way, brother. Not on this. Not on live TV.
Personal consult, Callum. Personal
Yeah,
consult.
you catch up. You got my number, man. Let's have a coffee.
Hey, one last question then, Dave, is around actually two here. Have you heard of any bad recommendations then that you've heard being given to athletes to help manage this process around transition and identity?
I think a lot of people that try and support athletes through transition try and stop the athlete from feeling afraid and petrified, and they try and reassure them everything's going to be okay. And that doesn't. It's never from an unmeaning. That they're still good-meaning people, well-meaning people, whatever that phrase is. The key bit for me is the secret to taking care of distress is acceptance of the worst possible outcomes. So if you're in transition, often our mind plays with catastrophe. It sees catastrophe unfolding in front of us, and it scares the shit out of us. I want people to treat that like that guy Alex Honnold who climbs that rock and goes, you know what, I could die.
Yeah.
And he goes, and I could be the most successful climber of all time. So when they hit transition, it's like, whoa, I could be poor on the street within 3 months, right? Or I could make it really, really big and be a multimillionaire within 3 months. So both possibilities are true. And then if they can sit in that place to go, yeah, distress it's actually okay to feel distress. It's okay to feel tonight I can't do anything and just go to bed. That's absolutely fine. So that often just take the pressure off themselves because often people try and reassure them, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. People go to me like, oh, man, we could lose. I go, man, you could get a hiding. And they're like, what? And I go, you could get thrashed. You could go all the way overseas and end up getting smashed and spent $10,000, $15,000, got nothing. And they're like, what do you mean? And I go, well, that's a possibility, isn't it? And they go, well, you said, oh, I guess it is. So that's probably one key thing is often people try and reassure us.
Yeah.
But for me, the reassurance is a cowardly thing. It's like I'm trying to take away the bad feeling.
Mm.
The courageous thing is to go, you know what? Catastrophe could happen.
Mm.
It's just part of life. Catastrophe does. You think about some of the shit that hits people. It's
Yeah.
catastrophe, man. And I just want them to go, just take the pressure off yourself. Sometimes shit will
Mm.
happen, sometimes it won't. But the key bit is whether it's catastrophe or not for me becomes irrelevant because it's, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and go back to that courage. Go to that courage each
Correct.
time. To that
Correct.
courage. These athletes have done that. They know that
They've done
process.
that their whole lives. How many times have they had to smash themselves and be courageous? That's their best friend.
Yeah, and so it's just taking that process into this new chapter of life, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And I guess the other thing, then, this is, I want people obviously not just take this. This is my view, but it's up to debate for people to talk about their own way. Because a lot of people in the transition, people often say to them, "What's the safest thing you can do?" You know, what's the safest thing you can do? What's this? Where can you get security? Those sorts of things. You see how if we think about courage and coward, when we think that way, we've gone straight down the coward end.
Yeah.
So if they can thank people for their advice, like thank you very much for your concern, and then in your head just think that's the last thing I'm going to do. Right now, it calls for massive braveness,
Yeah.
and then jump.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple
Awesome.
of things. Yeah.
Um, hey, look, Dave, last question, and I know you've got a book and also a chance to promote if you've got any, if you do take on clients, after their sport or whatever. What's your best reading material you'd advise? And yeah, if people want to get in touch, can they get in touch? Do you offer that service?
We'll start with the reading one.
Mm.
The couple of authors I'd suggest reading. David Gemmell. So David Gemmell was expelled from school at 15 in London for starting a gambling ring. And then he went on and became a professional bouncer and used to write for fun. Then one day one of his mates picked up his scraps of paper and said, bro, you should send that into a publisher. So he did, and he became the greatest writer of heroic fantasy of all time. So he died at 59, so we lost a very good author at 59, and he wrote 34 novels. And so he'll go and study a place like Greece and Thermopylae, where the Spartans fought the Persians.
Yeah.
And then he'll travel the pubs, meet all the locals, find out all about their historical battles and legends.
Mm.
And then he goes back to England and he'd write stories. So he wrote a couple. So, for example, there's a couple ones called Lion of Macedon and the Dark Prince, and that was about Alexander the Great. And it was about Spartans and Sparta and the Persians, but just a little bit later. So he writes about the things that we've been talking about right now, but in a way which captivates us in the story. And he's got a couple of like Waylander, the assassin, Drust the legend, Skulgannon swordsman. So he just has these different characters, like the front rowers, like the X-Men's like a front rower, the swordsman's like a first five, does ballet like most first fives when they're kids. And becomes a swordmaster. So he's one, I'd read him because he's got some great metaphors and themes that run through his books. And the other one is Lee Child, so Jack Reacher.
Yeah.
Jack Reacher, he has that philosophy, a plan's only good until you get punched in the face.
Okay.
Life punches us in the face quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I love the metaphor. And Jack Reacher's a pretty hard out fella. I just like his resilience and robustness and takes no shit. So there's some good stuff in that as well, about holding to identity.
Yeah, so these are underlying principles that are shared through.
Correct. Yeah, so each character in these stories have the struggle of identity and the struggle of holding to identity. And so it's the same theme. It's the same theme. David Gemmell's way more profound in that respect. And then there's probably one other book I'd read, which some
Oh,
Mark Manson.
right.
They can type in Mark Manson, the subtle art of not giving a fuck article, and they'll be able to find the article that came out about 5 years ago that he wrote, which was the start of what ended up as the book. So they don't have to even buy the book. They could just find the article online and read that. And basically it's saying you've got to be careful about what you care about because you've only got so much care you can give.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And people resonate with that whole concept of, oh, well, I've got to, like it's that whole, just not giving us stuff about things.
Yeah.
We care too much about shit that doesn't matter.
That's an awesome note to wrap up on, Dave. And I feel like I've had one-on-one session with you. I really appreciate it.
That's good, man.
And there's comments here from former players that you've helped. Here's one, Toby Moreland, legend, Dave, blast from the park.
Goosebumps.
Oh, look, I feel very honoured to have some of your time. I know you're flat out and such an important topic, that I feel is could be a bit of an epidemic if we don't do something about it. With
Agreed. Yes.
Rolling. So, look, really, thank you. And can people get a hold of you, or is your books?
Yep, they can. They'll be able to track me down. Yep. Well, feel free. They can track me down and they can access it online, I think.
I'll put your website.
Or you can put it up. You can put it up. Yeah.
Yep, and people can click away. So, hey, stay on after this, Dave. I'll just quickly say a few things, but to everyone listening, no doubt there's some pieces of gold in there. So, Dave, thanks for your time on behalf of everyone. And that's JT and Dave out for the night.
Yes, Jared.